Tonight we'll be in Habakkuk Chapter 2. Let me give you a brief summary of what we learned last week from Habakkuk Chapter 1. Last week we saw Habakkuk's complaint about injustice. The prophet Habakkuk begins by crying out to God, questioning why he allows injustice, violence, and wrongdoing to prevail in Judah. He is perplexed by the apparent delay in God's judgment and the continued suffering of the righteous at the hands of the wicked. Also, last week we saw God's response, the Babylonians as instruments of judgment. God responds by revealing that he will raise up the Babylonians or Chaldeans as a powerful nation to bring judgment upon Judah for its sins. Despite their wickedness, God will use the Babylonians to fulfill his purposes, but their actions will eventually lead to their own judgment. Also, last week we saw Habakkuk's second complaint, God's justice question, we can title it. Habakkuk grapples with the idea that a holy and just God would use a more wicked nation, the Babylonians, to punish Judah. He questions why God would allow such an evil nation to prosper and wonders how long this injustice will last, continuing his dialogue with God in search for understanding. So we see Habakkuk crying out to God with all these different questions and complaints, but you'll see this dialogue continue on in chapter 2, where he asks a question and God responds. So let's get right into it. This is Habakkuk chapter 2. I'm coming out of the NLT translation. I put the text on the screen for you. Verse 1 says, I will climb up to my watchtower and stand at my guard post. There I will wait to see what the Lord says and how he will answer my complaint. So right here we see Habakkuk as a watchman on the walls. And we know when a watchman was on the walls for a city, they would be looking out as a way of protecting the city and warning them of an approaching army or some kind of a danger. But also if there was a message to be received and the messenger was approaching, they would be ready and see that messenger approaching and be able to respond. So he's setting himself up as a person that is waiting for the message, literally for the message from God to come in response to his complaint, which we just spoke about in the last chapter. So this points to his faithful expectation that God is going to respond to him and answer him. And he's posturing himself to receive whatever the Lord has said about his complaint. Verse 2 goes on to say, so this is God's response. Then the Lord said to me, write my answer plainly on tablets so that a runner can carry the correct message to others. So we see the importance of God's word, first of all, because it said, the Lord said to me. And it was common, whenever during this time period, anytime there was a important pronouncement, that it be written down on clay tablets and posted in a public area so that everybody could see it. So this is the idea here, that it needed to be legible. It needed to be easy to understand because this was literally God's message here. So, and it was going to be placed in a public place so people, even passerbys, could understand what was being said here. That's what he means when he says so that a runner can carry the correct message to other. Now, this right here, there's a lot of different interpretations as it relates to verse 2. I'll just share with you at least 3. There's many different interpretations that bring out different elements of this, but all agree that, of course, this is God that is speaking, and the importance of disseminating that message to the public. But let's just look I'll share my screen real quick, and it's I'll share at least 3 different ways to look at this verse. So one of the ways I put down here, this verse is showing the fact that we need to make this message so clear that even someone running by can understand it at a glance. Normally when we read Habakkuk 2, if you're like me, you grew up reading King James, so you probably know it as, and the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tablets or tables, that he may run that readeth it. So also, this points out, and another interpretation of this is the importance of quickly following the message's instruction. So it's a haste. You see the terminology about running with it, or he that runs, or he that's is a herald who spreads the message out. He says, quickly follow the message instruction. Why? Because again, if God said these things, we are to quickly obey what God said, because these things will happen. Everything God has said through the prophets will happen. Also, another third interpretation, or what you pull out of this verse is normally the one that you hear most of the time, is the fact that receive the message and proclaim it as a herald would. So once you receive the message, write the vision, which was God's response. Make it plain, make it legible, make it so that it's clearly understood by the hearers, so that a herald who would announce this message, and run with it, and send the message from town to town. But the importance here was that God spoke and everyone needed to hear it, but it needed to be in such a way that everybody would understand it. Because they understood it, then they could properly apply it. All right, so let me go on to verse 3. Verse 3 says, this vision is for a future time. So right there, he's telling them the things that I'm saying are going to happen, but they're going to happen when? In a future time. Verse 3 goes on to say, it describes the end, and it will be fulfilled. So there's no doubt that these things are going to happen, because once again, this vision came from who? From God. Whatever God speaks will occur. It goes on to say, if it seems slow in coming, wait patiently, for it surely will take place. It will not be delayed. Oftentimes, from our vantage point as humans, when we pray out to God for something, or even an answer or something to happen, we often think that it's delayed, or it's taking God a long time to respond. But in His perfect time, and He knows the exact time He will answer it, and He knows exactly when it should take place, whatever it is that He's doing. Or in this context here, He said this vision is for a future time. So that means you got to wait patiently for this thing to happen. But because I am God, as He's saying here, it will happen. If it seems slow from your vantage point, just wait patiently, for it will surely take place and will not be delayed. Because we got to remember, as the song says, He's an on-time God. May not come when you want Him, but He'll be right on time. Our vantage point is, God, you're taking a long time to answer this. Whereas Habakkuk was saying, you seem like you're taking a long time to judge the wickedness in this land. The wickedness has been going on for a long time. It seems like they're forever going to succeed. But God is always reminding us, even today, people think that as well. It seems like everybody's getting away with everything, but God is saying, hold on, God will send judgment. Man is not going to get away with everything forever. There will come a point in time where God will say, that is it. This is the end, this is it. This is the end time right here. Jesus will come back and will set things right. So this vision, he says, for a future time. So it had a present day fulfillment, but it also has an eternal fulfillment for even us to this day. We've not seen the completion of all the visions that God has said in this, and I believe even in this vision here, we've not seen the complete or the full fulfillment of these things yet. But here it says, and it reminds us to the fact that no matter how long you think what God has said, it's just taking place. It's taking so much time for God's promises to unfold. They surely will. Even if it seems slow in coming, wait patiently, for it surely will take place and will not be delayed. Verse 4, he says, look at the proud. They trust in themselves and their lives are crooked. But then look what he does. He compares it, though, to the righteous. He says in verse 4, but the righteous will live by their faithfulness to God. So we see here, look at the proud. They trust in themselves. But what does the righteous do? The righteous do not trust in themselves. They trust in the hand of God. They trust in the words of God. They live by their faithfulness to God. So we have, as a believer, you have a faith in God. Your faith in God is not just a mental assent or a mental awareness that God exists, but it's also a faith that leads to action. We demonstrate our faith by our actions, for our faith is an active faith. It's not a dead faith. A dead faith had no works that will accompany it. A true faith that the righteous will live by will be followed by the way we live. It's an action. Our faith is a belief that leads us to act in accordance to that belief. As we like to say, we're not saved by our works, but our works demonstrate that we have been saved. It's not the way we earn salvation, but it's a demonstration to mankind that I have been saved. It's like we talk about with the fruit of the Spirit. You can see that you've been with God. You can see you've been changed. You can see that you're a part of God's kingdom. You're part of God's family because you act like your father would. He says, don't lie, because he doesn't lie. You don't lie. You don't cheat. You don't steal. You do these things that are considered faithful. But we could say the inverse too. But the unrighteous will die by their faithlessness in God. So this is what he's doing in verse 4, saying, look at the proud. They trust in themselves. And he's reminding them that the proud are not going to get away with everything. The ungodly are not going to get away with everything. There comes a point in time where God will send that judgment upon them as well. And in this context, the Babylonians, who seem to be succeeding in conquering the nations, or the nation of Judah specifically here, that they too will receive their punishment. And he says, but he reminds us that the righteous or the just will live by their faithfulness to God. Now, this statement should be familiar to us, for those who read the New Testament as well, because Paul picks up on this idea about the righteous will live by faith, or the just will live by faith. We see this in the writings of Galatians and Romans, also the writer of Hebrews, which many think is Apostle Paul, others argue maybe not, but either way, in both Romans and Galatians, which are Pauline letters, we have clearly, and the book of Hebrews, that idea is developed, that we're saved by grace through faith, and we're justified by our faith. But our faith is not a dead faith. That's what James was picking up on, that our faith, because it is a true faith and not a false faith, will actually impact the way we live. For the righteous will live by their faithfulness to God. So much more could be said about that, but that verse is a very famous verse, if you want to phrase it that way, in the New Testament, because that really encapsulates what this whole Christian experience is about. That we as believers, because we are in relationship with God, we seek to follow his command. If we say that we're a believer, we want to do the things that he said. We don't lean to our own understanding, or like this verse says, they trust in themselves. We don't trust in ourselves. We don't trust in our heart. We trust in the hand of God. We trust in his righteousness. And we have faith in God, which means we're going to trust in him and put action behind what we claim. Our profession will actually lead to action. So we will live by faithfulness to God. Now we see a shift here in verses 5 really through 19. And if you want to add 20 in as well to the end of the chapter, and you're going to look at where we talk about woes, or woe oracles. And these are pronouncements of God's divine judgment for the various sins of the nation of Babylon. Um, so what I'll do from verses 5 through 19, I'll read them and provide a very quick commentary, and then I'll go back and share a chart with you that just kind of outlines an overarching idea about these woe oracles, or these laments of judgment. All right, so verse 5 says, wealth is treacherous, and the arrogant are never at rest. They open their mouths as wide as the grave, and like death, they are never satisfied. In their greed, they have gathered up many nations and swallowed up many peoples. But soon their captives will taunt them. They will mock them, saying, what sorrow awaits you, thieves? Now you will get what you deserve. You've become rich by extortion. But how much longer can this go on? Suddenly, your debtors will take action. They will turn on you and take all you have while you stand trembling, helpless. So you see that they will reap what they sow. Verse 8 says, because you have plundered many nations, now all the survivors will plunder you. You committed murder throughout the countryside and filled the towns with violence. What sorrow awaits you who build big houses with money gained dishonestly? You believe your wealth will buy security, putting your family's nests beyond the reach of danger. But by the murders you committed, you have shamed your name and forfeited your lives. The very stones in the walls crowd against you, and the beams in the ceilings echo your complaint. So it's just basically showing that they will reap what they've sown, and all the things that they've done to others, the murders, the injustices, all these things that they've done to others will be turned upon them. And there's no escape. Verse 11 is pointing out that there's no escape for this punishment. Even so much, it says, the very stones in the walls crowd against you. The beams in the ceiling echo the complaint. So they're saying that fact you're not going to get away with this, even though very walls, the stones, would testify against your many sins. And this is speaking specifically to Babylon. He says, "What sorrow awaits you who build cities with money gained through murder and corruption? Has not the Lord of heaven's armies promised that the wealth of nations will turn to ashes? They work so hard, but all in vain," showing the deceitfulness of riches. And these riches that the evil nations have gained off the backs of others through oppression, through slavery, through all type of evil practices. But he's saying that these things that you've done will return on your own head, and also the fact that all this wealth that you got will come to nothing. He says, "You worked so hard, but it's all in vain." Verse 14 says, "For as the waters fill the sea, the earth will be filled with an awareness of the glory of God." See, God is sovereign and in control of everything. And by his judgments, the whole world, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. The Bible talks about in the New Testament that Jesus Christ is Lord. But we see here a realization that God is in control and no one can escape his judgment. And God sees all. And as it says, "For as the waters fill the sea, the earth will be filled with the awareness of the glory of God." Bible also talks about, even in Romans, that all the visible things we see, all of God's creation, speak of his existence so clearly that man is without excuse for denying his existence. But here, verse 14, the earth will be filled with an awareness of the glory of God. Verse 15 goes on to say that, "What sorrow awaits you who make your neighbors drunk? You force your cup on them so that you can gloat over their shameful nakedness." So again, we see here some of the wickedness of these evil nations in these type of acts, where they're getting the people drunk so they can do shameful things to them. Verse 16 says, "But soon it will be your turn to be disgraced." So you see that picks up on the same thing we've been seeing through these different woes here, that the things that they did to others would now turn to them. The disgrace they placed upon others would now come upon them. And again, we're talking about specifically Babylon. But but soon it'll be your turn to be disgraced. Come, drink and be exposed. Drink from the cup of the Lord's judgment. Oftentimes we see the cup being used, or drinking of this cup, that speaks of judgment. It says, "And all your glory will be turned to shame." So there'll be a reversal of everything that they thought they gained through evil means, and now it will come to nothing, or be all brought to nothingness, or they'll all their glory will be turned to shame, as it says here. Verse 17 says, "You cut down the forests of Lebanon. Now you will be cut down. You destroyed the wild animals, so now their terror will be yours. You committed murder throughout the countryside and filled the towns with violence." So describing again while this judgment is going to come upon them, or while these woe oracles will be pronounced on them. And again, I'll explain about those woe oracles a little bit more when I show you my chart. Verse 18, "What good is an idol carved by man, or a cast image that deceives you? How foolish to trust in your own creation, a God that can't even talk. What sorrow awaits you who say, wooden idols, wake up and save us. To speechless stone images you say, rise up and teach us. Can an idol tell you what to do? They may be overlaid with gold and silver, but they are lifeless inside." So remember, that was another one of the characteristics of the violence, the shameful activities, also the idol worship here. This is describing their idol worship, and just showing how foolish this idol worship is. That you're literally worshiping the thing that you made with your own hand and asking your false god to save you in times of trouble. But he's saying this is actually foolish. So he's saying, mocking them, and saying, telling your idols to wake up and save us, or to your speechless stones, rise up and teach us. It just reminds me of the prophet Elijah when he was talking to the prophets of Baal, and he was saying, "Cry out to your false god. Maybe he can't hear you. Maybe he's on a trip. Maybe he's using the bathroom." If you study it out, but the prophet Elijah was mocking the false god Baal when they were crying out to him to do the miracle. And it's like, well, where is he? He's not responding. And so you see the use of this mocking tone and just how foolish it is to trust in a false God. So we see the Habakkuk, the prophet Habakkuk doing the same thing, mocking their false worship of their false God. But all this is to point to just the foolishness, the folly of trusting in anyone other than the true God, trusting in themselves. They were trusting in their own power. They were getting things by ill-gotten gains. They were involved with violence. It's a very wicked nation. And this is also why we see with Habakkuk chapter 2, why Habakkuk was asking God, how is it that you're using this nation to judge your people, this wicked nation to judge your people? But God is letting them know also that this nation, first of all, he can do with his creation what he will. Second of all, that God is not letting this nation get away with everything. But he's using this nation to correct his people. But they too, because God is just, they too will get their punishment in their time. So I read through those pretty quickly. Let me just give you a very quick, just a quick chart to kind of more of a bird's eye view of what's going on here with verses 5 through 19. All right, so now it should be on the screen. It says, the 5 woes pronounced against the Babylonians. Now, each woe is a strong message from God that points out the specific wrongdoings and injustices committed by the Babylonians. That's what I was just speaking of through all those verses. These messages make it clear that God sees their actions and will hold them accountable. And you remember verse 11, it said, God sees your actions. There's nothing that you can do to hide. Like God doesn't know about the injustices you're doing and all this violence you're doing or the shame that you're causing upon the people. He said, even the stones will cry out. These buildings that you made from and the money that you got from injustices, stealing from people, those very stones will cry out as a witness to your witness, to your wickedness. It says these messages make it clear that God sees their actions and will hold them accountable because God is a just God, so he will punish sin. In the end, they will face certain punishment for all the harm they have caused. So that's part of God's answer right there. That this wicked nation that he's using, they too will get theirs. So when we looked at verses 5 through 8, we saw that talking about a woe to the greedy. And again, and this woe is talking about a lament or a judgment that God is sending, a divine judgment God is sending upon the people for their specific wrongdoings. In verses 5 through 8, condemnation of those who gain wealth through exploitation. Then we see a woe to the violent. That's what we read in verses 9 through 11, which is a denunciation of those who build their estates through bloodshed. And this was literal bloodshed. Number 3, you see a woe to the oppressive in verses 12 through 14. And this dealt with an accusation against those who establish cities through iniquity. And then woe number 4, this is the woe to the immoral. In verses 15 through 17, we see a rebuke of those who indulge in drunkenness and immorality. And those tend to go hand in hand. Drunkenness leads to immorality. Also, the last woe, we see a woe to the idolatrous. And that's a critique of those who worship lifeless idols. And that's what I was speaking of when we talk about how he was mocking their false gods, the same as Prophet Elijah was doing. So, and again, like I said, these woes or this woe oracle, which is a divine message from God, is a strong message from God that points out the specific wrongdoings and injustices committed by the Babylonians. And we see it has even a modern day understanding of this as well. All those who do these type of activities are in a situation where you're going against what God will want his people to do. So all you can do is expect God's judgment upon you for these things. But God has always provided a way out from being punished for these sins. He's provided a way out that you don't have to participate in these things. But here's an example of the justice of God and the sovereignty of God, because God is sovereign to use this wicked nation to judge his people, but he's also just that those that are wicked will also, although he's using them to judge his people, they also themselves will receive punishment. The last verse we see, which is verse 20, says, "But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him." So right there is letting us know and reminding us that all these things that happen are going to happen through the power of God. So what I mean by that is that God in his sovereignty chose the Babylonians to judge his own people. And the fact is said, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. You can't answer back to God for his judgments. You can't tell God, no, God, you shouldn't have used the Babylonians to judge us. You should have just did this or that, or you should have let us judge them. You can't you can't speak back to God what God does, because we know that God is just. Also, if you're the creator, and the only one is the creator is God, he can do with his creation what he will. And he knows the purposes that he's made for the creation. He knows how long someone should live, how short they should live, how long a nation should thrive, when a nation should be wiped out, when God wants to provide um, food and rain and all these things are under God's control. So let all the earth be silent before him. And when we see that here, it just reminds us of the power of God. That you might have questions, well, why God this, why God that? But ultimately we realize that he's God. He doesn't have to give us an answer. But when he does give us an answer, we are to accept what God allows. We are to accept what God has done. Many people during the time of Jesus would have said, "Wait a minute, Jesus, you can't die. You can't suffer because you were without sin. This isn't right." But we see that that was all a part of God's plan. And you have to struggle with those things and say, "Wait a minute. I have my own plan, how I think things in this universe should work. But I trust you, God, because you're just. Everything that you say is right, because God is the ultimate authority of what is good. He doesn't look to somebody greater than him to decide what is good. He created this universe, so he by default is good. He of himself is good. He is a good God. And remember, everyone on this earth has broken God's law. So none of us deserve his mercy. None of us deserve anything good to happen to us. We really don't, if you really think about it. So it's only God's mercy. It's only his love when he blesses us with anything, or when he, as he did with his people, when he used the nation to judge his people, but he didn't just utterly cast them out, just wipe his people off the face of the earth. But he had a plan even for the tough things of judgment. And it reminds us that because God is in relationship with his people, he loves his people, so he has to chastise his people. He has to punish his people for a time so that they will return unto him and ultimately will be rewarded for their obedience to him. And we see that idea encapsulated in the verses where we read about that the just shall live by their faithfulness, or the just shall live by faith. And that faith, again, like I always say, leads to action. It's an outward sign of an inward understanding or inward relationship. When we say we have faith in God, and we don't just say, "I know you exist, God," but because you exist, I'm going to live this way. My actions will be in line with my profession. All right, much more could be said about this, but I pray this word is blessed somebody tonight. Um, this is a pretty deep theological chapter, I will say. So there should be a lot of questions about the sovereignty of God over and against the choices of man and how God works all these things out. God's foreknowledge, is it passive? Is it active? It's a lot of theological discussions that do come out of this. So if you have any questions, again, put them in the chat.